Ms. Wonky Tonk, how you doing?
Hi, Glenn. I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing very well, very well. I love your hair.
Thank you.
Absolutely love it. Mine was red and it's kind of like faded out, so
Yeah,
it's
I love.
time.
I see the light shimmering through it. It's got a strawberry tinge.
Yeah, it does. It does. I was trying to get closer to your color, but it doesn't work with my hair. It's like getting a little bit older, so the gray comes out,
Right.
and gray doesn't dye very well. You would think it would, but it doesn't.
Interesting. I wonder. I have to do some research on that. I feel like that's like some sort of porous situation.
Yeah, it
I don't.
could be. It very
Uh,
well could be.
I
Yeah.
need to pay attention to that though because that's planning for my future.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Um, that's a great place to start. What is your history? Like I've read a few interviews with you, and listened to a couple of podcasts you've been on. Um, but I didn't really get a sense for your history other than you're originally from Kentucky, right? I mean, there's not a whole lot out there. So,
That's an interesting notion. I love that about in your email how you're like, let me do some research and I'll get back to you. And I love when that happens because someone's caring about their art form enough to care.
hmm. No,
uh,
absolutely.
the past is an interesting thing. I feel a little bit like stories. I try not to tell stories of the past because it somehow roots me back into that. Um, but I am from Kentucky,
Hmm.
and I've done 1,000 bajillion things.
Hmm. Well,
um,
good.
yeah, and I'm. What could it be? Let's see. I mean, I've I went to Morocco and I was right out of high school because I loved the movie Almost Famous, and Penny
Hmm.
Lane said she needed a new crowd, and so did I. And Morocco was not the place for me.
Right. But why not though? What was it about Morocco?
It was a very I'm a feeling type person, and so I don't really ask questions. I just go on gut feeling and figure it out. And Morocco as a 17-year-old girl was a real quite an interesting experience, which ended up in a little bit of a held hostage scenario by this fella named Mustafa,
Oh my
which was
God.
really bonkers. It was during the World Cup when Shakira was singing "Da na 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 Africa," and it was in South Africa, and it was
Uh-huh.
um, so that was this thing that was on all the televisions that sort of threaded everything together. But I remembered her voice being on the TV and not knowing if I'd ever see anyone again.
Wow. Were you solo or did you have friends or something with you?
There was this fella, this Frenchman named Kevin, who I met on a Delta airplane. He doesn't speak English and I don't speak French, but
Hmm.
um, we had we had met up in France, and he had gotten an old ambulance that we drove from
Hmm.
France to Africa. So I was with him, but that was an adventure of itself.
Wow, that's crazy. That's
I know.
crazy. And was that your first time outside of the US?
It it was. I had moved to Denmark for business school, um,
Hmm.
and then just was traveling around and hit Morocco for a little while because of Almost Famous. But it was my first time out of the country yet.
Wow. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Um, I imagine your parents or family and whatnot were like, what the fuck is she doing? Like, this is this is kind of insane, right? And there's a thrill to that.
Yeah, I think though that's been my entire life, and so at a certain point very early on, they stopped asking questions,
Right.
and
I
I
love
stopped
it.
telling them. So it's just kind of operating in all these different worlds without really having them communicate.
Yeah. Wow. And then, obviously I'm skipping around here, but I know you were locked down in Ecuador for some amount of time.
Yeah.
What
Uh,
happened there? Like, first of all, why were you in Ecuador? And then second of all, um, how long were you stuck in Ecuador?
oh boy. Uh, I went to Ecuador because I got really bamboozled and burnt out on music, the music industry.
Mm-hmm.
There, with that was a little bit of depression, and I had a dream. And Ecuador, the equator was kind of just this place that called me, and I went to this tantric yoga shamanic school
Mm-hmm.
in Ecuador, and 2 weeks before I was supposed to fly home, COVID hit real big time, and the whole country shut down.
Wow.
Military like, so we weren't allowed to leave the house. It was like you could leave for 2 hours out of one day uh, per week per household in order to get what you
Wow.
needed. And it was so I was supposed to be there for 3 months, and I ended up being there a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you were obviously able to support yourself somewhere there, right?
Yeah, which was really the most fantastical part of it was that I work in production, so I do art
Mm-hmm.
department for commercials and photo sheets. Um, and so with COVID, this very experiential in-person school was shut down, and I was stuck
Mm-hmm.
there. And so we turned it on into an online school. So I was able
Oh,
to
wow.
produce, shoot, and edit all these videos to help with the content. And so that gave me food, a place to stay, and money as I was stuck there, which I don't know if
Wow.
there's a better scenario to be stuck anywhere during a pandemic.
Yeah, no kidding. Especially, I mean, and Ecuador is, cheap. So, um, it's not a bad place to be if you're, stuck somewhere and making, US level salaries like that. That would be great,
Yeah,
you know.
exactly. It was quite the experience.
Wow. Um, so when were you actually able to leave Ecuador? Like relatively recently, right?
I got back in mid-October of 2020. So
Oh, okay.
it
Wow.
I've been home for a while now, and I'm still adjusting. It's a weird.
Right.
It wasn't so much culture shock going there, but coming back in the midst of pandemic and just all kinds of different things. It's an adjustment. We're all adjusting, right? But
Well,
then
yeah.
back
Yeah.
to America
I,
from South America.
I assume you speak Spanish then, right?
Yes and no. I took 8 years of it in high school and college, so
Wow.
I got really good at hearing it. But in Kentucky, it's kind of like if you're speaking Spanish in Kentucky, you're just trying to start a riot or something. so,
Right.
so you couldn't really practice speaking, and so going to Ecuador, I got to I could understand, but I still to this day can't really speak. But luckily,
Wow.
we got to a point we understood each other.
Yeah, I imagine, like Spanish with a Kentucky accent probably sounds really strange to them, right? They're like, what what language are you speaking? Like it sounds like Spanish kinda,
Yeah,
but what is that? You know?
exactly. It was fun. We incorporated it, and they had fun with it, especially
Hmm.
playing Uno. Uno
Oh,
was a way
wow.
we passed the time, but would always be like, like blue is azul, so it'd be like azul, and just kind of countrifying everything like Uno, dos, tres, and they started speaking in that accent, which was
Oh,
embarrassing.
that's so funny.
Yeah,
Oh, I love it. I love it. Um, so I assume you got what you wanted out of Ecuador, right? I mean, and more, right? Having been there for 9 times, or I'm sorry, 3 times longer than you thought you were going to be.
9 times would have been great too.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
I feel like it's a gift that keeps on giving. Every day I'm realizing something more. But I think one of the
Hmm.
biggest things is that I something happened um in that school and in that moment of unlocking something in my voice. And so
Mm-hmm.
now I'm able to sing more freely. It's like
Mm-hmm.
it took out the block of the business part and took me back into myself. And so every day now that we're in the studio recording and just creating and co-creating, it's really interesting to notice those things because it's kind of like all of these lessons, and it's like planting all these flowers but forgetting that you did, and then and
Mm-hmm.
along the way be like, oh, that's what that was, so it's
Wow.
beautiful.
Did you do any recording while you were there?
um I did a few live streams, and I did a lot of just what I call demolicious, so just
Mm-hmm.
demo videos, and putting like found footage to them. But we tried a few sort of cross-continental collaborations, but
Mm-hmm.
even that was fun, but not so fortuitous or fruitful.
Right.
But now it's interesting. I feel like it's a little bit of creative. I think I'm excited about the summer for everyone because it feels a little bit like creativity blue balls,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No,
everything.
absolutely.
I can't wait to see the mess that happens.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that's what happens. Um,
I
but
feel
it's also possible that we don't get to that point for a couple of years, which is, terrifying to me.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of my friends, make all of their money from, something related to entertainment,
Mhm.
and they're all basically fucked, you
Right.
know.
It's
Um,
hard.
yeah. I
But
mean,
I
if
go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, if nothing's open and your job is, say, security or sound or something like that, like, you know, there's no way to make money,
Right.
you know, and, the old fallback, which is, go to work for a restaurant. Well, if they're not hiring either, so it's like, what do you do,
Right.
you know? Um, so I feel really, really bad for my friends who are in that, in that industry. Um, I have a couple friends who haven't worked in a year and a half now,
Yeah.
or not a year and a half, a year, I guess. I guess it's only been a year.
It
Um,
feels like eternity, right?
it does. It does. And I miss live music so much,
Yeah.
you know. Um, but then again, a lot of that is nostalgia because the last several shows I've been to, I end up leaving, halfway through because I'm tired. I want to go to sleep, you know, like I'm done with it. Like, yeah, it sounded great, but I'm not staying out until 2 a.m. anymore,
Yeah.
so it's changed a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, I do hope that we're able to recover at some point. I think it's going to be a little bit longer than what most people think it's going to be.
I think so too. I think it's ripe for, I feel very much like it's Vietnam era of coming out of the shadows and the creativity that comes from all of the all of the things happening. And I feel I feel like it it will come back. And what I've noticed is more and more people who aren't necessarily in the entertainment business or music are also missing live music.
Right.
A- And then the people who do play it, I think, are remembering the medicine of it more so that they can't and don't get to play out. And these things
Right.
that we really take for granted, and it becomes like a job, and it becomes the ego, and it becomes this other thing. And so I really feel like it's connecting everyone back into whatever's going to happen, where maybe it's my grand vision is that it's like basement shows again, or like Dick Van
Yeah.
Dyke in the parlor and four people just performing, and this like the community of it, but the raw and the real, and not just going to
Hmm.
see the bar, band and that's awesome, but then there's theatrics about that, and even just
Hmm.
booking a lineup where it's all punk bands. It's like that's awesome. But if you throw in some other sort of variation within that that has a punk mentality, but it's like some sort of reggae, and then you've got a DJ and this moment that makes that night
Hmm.
not seem so long, and maybe you would stay till 2 a.m.,
Uh,
It's
definitely. So, um, I'm primarily from Seattle, I guess. I mean, I've been in and out of here for longer than I care to admit, like 35 years. Um, but always in and out, you know. Um, and one of the things I loved about Seattle in the, late 80s, early 90s was these weird shows that would have, and trust me, I'm getting to something here, um, where you'd have, a punk band, and you'd have like a cover band, and you'd have like, a quote grunge band, and whatever, all on the same bill,
yeah.
you know. And then that kind of died out a little bit. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I was um, attempting to manage, and I'm going to put that in air quotes, manage a band, and they were. It's hard to put a genre in them, but anyway, they were from the early '90s here in Seattle,
Okay.
and I put together a show with two other bands, and none of the bands were the same at all. Like it was like this random assortment, and people either loved the shit out of it or they hated it.
Yep.
You know, um, my buddy Jim Bass Knight, who's a one of his first bands opened for the Ramones first show in Seattle, for example, right?
Wow.
But he's like very power poppy,
Hmm.
and then I had kind of a grungy sort of band play, and then Sky Mary, which was the other band, play, and one of our local newspapers said something along the lines of, and I'm exaggerating and paraphrasing, but basically like, "What fucking idiot put this show together?"
Yeah.
Right? And I was like, "That's me. I'm that
Right.
idiot." Right? um, but it's hard now to even sell, a couple hundred seats, for a show.
Definitely.
And there's really no money there. Like there's you know you might be able to get a guarantee of, if you're super lucky, maybe 2,000, right? Which is like very, very hard to get out of a bar. You're more like maybe 300.
Right. And that's if you're lucky.
Yeah, exactly. Well, sometimes you're lucky to just get paid, period.
Right. Exactly.
Maybe some warm beer and a tostada or something, but other than that, you're pretty much fucked. Um, and my experience with that was dealing with a band that used to sell out, not stadiums, but they would sell out, 2 or 3 thousand seat, venues. Um, and suddenly I'd have to explain to them, you're gonna make like $500 if you're lucky, and you're gonna split it 4 ways or 5 ways, right? And they did not like that. But I was like, that's reality,
Yeah.
you know? And there's nothing I can do about that.
Right.
I can't negotiate better because people are like, well, we only have 200 seats. Like, it doesn't matter even if you sell it out. It's $15 a ticket, let's say, which is super high. Most of them are like 8 to 10.
Yeah.
There's only so much money to go around,
Exactly.
you know? Um,
I think that's also, you have a band like that and you have an industry like that, and I think you have something like COVID right now, and those any of those people are happy to see music or play it. Don't
right.
matter if there's 200 people or they're getting paid or not. And I think that's the magic of it. And you fucking idiot for booking that lineup, is the thing is everyone has their point of view. Everyone's
Hmm.
gonna judge something, but I will say they either loved it or hate it, but I guarantee 99% of them remember it,
Oh,
right?
yeah. No, there's
And
no doubt.
and
No.
that I think that's what the art is, man. It's like, well, did you remember it? You gotta take those chances, and some people will love it, and some people won't. And
Yeah.
Beautiful. So thanks for doing that.
Well, thank you. My experience with that was pretty interesting because I, set up the show, and then Seattle is a weird music city, so nobody buys tickets until like the day of the show,
Yeah.
right? So I think we pre-sold like 70 out of 200, and it was really depressing all the way around. And so I decided I'm just gonna buy all the tickets. So I did. I bought like 50, and just so it seemed like it was sold out.
Yeah.
And then the night of the show, I was basically either, selling at cost or giving away, these tickets just to make it, full. And in hindsight, that was a really stupid thing to do, but I did
Yeah.
it anyway. And, it ended up overselling. I think we ended up with like 220, total out of a room that supposedly, held 200.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it worked out. But my second wife fucking hated me for that. She was like, "Did you really just spend $500 on tickets? You
Right.
know, for a band that you're supposed to be making from, money from, and yet, you're buying all these tickets." Probably had a lot to do with our divorce, but neither here nor there. And the whole reason I started talking about, Seattle stuff is you mentioned in one of the interviews I read, I forget where it's from, that Modest Mouse was one of your favorite bands.
Yeah. No one ever talks about that part. It's like
So,
country.
so, so here's my story about Modest Mouse. Okay,
All right. I'm listening.
in the very early '90s, they were a group of suburban kids just outside of Seattle from Issaquah, which is a kind of a hoity-toity suburb, right? Like it's whatever. And these kids tried to be grunge, right? Because it was that time of Seattle music, and they were fucking terrible. I mean, they were so bad. And I lived right around the corner from this venue that they would play in all the time. And every time they'd come on, I'd be like, "Oh fuck, they're one of the openers." So I'd go outside and like smoke weed or whatever for an hour, waiting for them to finish because they were so bad.
Yeah.
And then fast forward a couple of years, and I had moved out of Seattle. I'd been gone for a while, and suddenly I see this. I think it was on the radio or something like that, and I hear, oh, that's the latest from Modest Mouse, and I was like, what is this shit? Like, it doesn't even sound remotely what they sounded like before, And so I can't listen to them without hearing that,
Right.
smug little, suburban punk rock, pretend punk rock shit.
Yeah.
And I still to this day, I cannot listen to them at all.
You're not alone in that.
It Even when Johnny Marr joined, and he's like one of my favorite guitarists of all time, I was like,
Yeah.
I still can't listen to this. In fact, it's worse.
Yeah.
There's no way I can listen to this shit. Um, but yeah, I thought that was really funny. And everyone around at that time was like, these guys aren't going fucking anywhere. I mean, like they suck. They're horrible,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
Um, and then they came out with that almost like, fuck, I want to say almost like they might be giant, sort of like the funky, ding, 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 like what? It's like
Right.
what is this garbage? you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly. They're the masters of garbage.
yeah, oh, perfect. Yeah. Um, I've finally gotten to a point where I can kind of listen to them
Yeah.
without running for the bathroom. Um, but yeah, I understand why people like them. I personally am just like, no, they just rub me the wrong way.
Yeah.
Um,
Good. They're doing
what?
something.
Well, somebody can argue that if a band has if it invokes a visceral reaction in people, then they're actually doing something very good, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like Bob Dylan for me, right? Like
That's exactly what I was just gonna say.
that's so funny. Yeah, his voice makes me want to just. I mean, I can't think of anything that makes me angrier in music than his voice. Just
Yeah,
it makes me crazy.
I agree.
But yet, covers of his songs are incredible.
Yeah.
Like Mike Ness doing "Don't Think Twice," incredible cover. Ministry doing "Lay Lady Lay."
Mm.
Um, so he writes these songs that are good. It's just I can't stomach him right at all. It's
I love that you brought that up though, because that's exactly in college. I had a class called it was rock doc. And we just watched rock documentaries, and the
mhm,
first one was this. I think it's called. It's not Don't Look Back. I can never remember the name of it, but it was like touted as the very first American rock and roll documentary, and it was
mhm.
full black and white gritty film following Bob Dylan. And I fucking hate Bob Dylan. I fucking
Right.
hate Bob Dylan. But then I watched that and I love Bob Dylan because of a similar thing of Isaac Brokov. They're just the most pure and genius douchebag assholes. And they're really like consistent in it. And so their mentality behind it and the way they kind of just I think they're just so intelligent that it's like, why wouldn't I fuck with all these people? And so
That could be.
it's feeling more in this punk rock vibe of just like just getting one over on all the fuckers, right? And
Right.
but then in the meantime, really having if you're consistent in that and that's who you are, then that's the feeling that I love about Modest Mouse or with Bob Dylan the same way because
Hmm.
until seeing that part of him and his essence, it was like I can't stomach any of this music. And now when I hear it, I just hear his his staunch badassery, which is
Right.
it's interesting that there's so many elements to a person, let alone an artist.
Yeah. I mean, he definitely stepped outside of the boundaries of what was acceptable, right, for an acoustic person.
Right.
Um, and there was, I'm sure my friends are going to kill me for this, but there was some punk rock in there, right? I
Yep.
mean, at least in the attitude.
Yep.
Um,
Exactly.
I can't believe I just said that out loud where people can hear it, but um,
Good on you. It's
yeah,
true.
yeah, it is true. It is true. Um, and I want to talk about John Prine too in a little bit, because I think he had the same sort of thing going on. But at least he could sing though, so that it's a little bit different,
Yeah.
right? Like I can actually listen to a John Prine song and go like, oh yeah, no, I can, I can tolerate the lyrics. I'm sorry, the vocal, aspect.
Yeah.
Um, but you said something a little bit ago, and I realize this is a total jump off, but my girlfriend had a longtime ex, like 13 years of off and on stuff. And you probably are kind of guessing where I'm going with this. His name was Brian. So in listening to your stuff, I immediately just like, I think I had a playlist of your stuff on Spotify, just like playing in my headphones. And first of all, the song starts off, it's really, catchy. And then I started listening to the lyrics, and it was like, holy shit. And I'd actually texted my girlfriend and I said, babe, somebody wrote a song about your ex. And she listened to it like 5 or 6 times, texted
Amazing.
me back, and she's like, oh my God, my favorite line is everybody fucks up sometimes, but Brian fucks up all times. She's like, this was written for him, right? And we were just laughing so hard, and especially the very end. I remember you said a few minutes ago something about therapy, right? And the end of that when you're like, "This is like therapy," and she's like, "It fucking is. It's exactly like therapy." And then she's like, he's a total narcissist, right? So she's like, I want to post this, but he's going to see it and he's going to think I care enough to even post it, right? Which
Yeah.
is not the case. It's more of just like making fun of him,
Right.
you know? Oh my God, we laughed so hard.
Good.
Yeah,
Yes. Yes.
it's
The song
perfect.
strikes again.
Yeah, no, it's perfect, and pardon me for saying this, but it's definitely the breakaway song on that album for me,
I love
right?
it.
Like,
Yeah.
in fact, I was just listening to it a couple of hours before, we started this, just because I'm like, yeah, yeah, and it's kind of therapy for me too, because I'm like, you never want to think about your current exes, right? Like, no matter what, you just, you know, and especially for me, this guy, um, it's a long story, but
He was a
um,
Brian.
yeah, so exactly. So listening to it is like, yeah, okay, somebody else sees that he's an asshole. Okay, perfect. Right? Even though it's not about him, it's fun to pretend it is.
Yeah.
You
Good.
know? Um, yeah, it's just I I did see something where you were talking about that, and you're like, well, I don't really want to talk about it. It was just somebody who was involved in my life, and that really fucked me up, or something along those lines, right?
Yeah.
Um, I'm like, well, that's how one feels about an ex anything, right? Whether it's an ex, boyfriend or girlfriend or a bandmate or a work as whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't even want to talk about them. There's, the song kind of speaks for itself.
Exactly. The emotion is there.
Yeah. So I have to ask, has this Brian person heard said song? And if so, how did they react?
It's a great question, and I have no idea.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
Mostly because it's just a sound guy,
Mm.
curmudgeonly, sound guy, and I don't know him, but as a full band, we just during band practice after doing this one show with
Hmm.
this guy Brian who just ruined everything. It was in our blood so much that we just kept in all band practices just singing over and over, "Fuck you, Brian," and it felt like we were being like Third Eye Blind and Hanson and Blink 182, or just like, how do we? But it was fun because it was up until that point had been any sort of anger or sadness towards anything had gone more into this like sort of song, and it,
Hmm.
it was this turning point where it's just like, you know what, fuck that guy.
I love it. I love it.
fun, it's a fun anthem. When we play it live, that's what everyone says afterwards. They're always like, fuck that guy. So
It's
good.
funny. And he's probably some just like random dude at a shitty bar somewhere, like
Yep.
who doesn't even know that people are like, singing along to the song, like, yo, yeah, well, yeah, fuck you, Brian.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
I think at the end, um, you hate Brian after you listen to the song. You're like, yeah,
Yeah,
I don't even know the dude, but fuck him,
right.
right?
Well, that's why it's called Everyone's Got a Brian, because
Yeah, I
everyone,
love it.
whether they're named Brian or not, you got a guy in your life like this
Yeah,
person.
that's so
Like,
funny.
and just like your girlfriend, it's kind of like we've never because he's was a local sound guy, and it wasn't
Hmm.
about creating drama, which is why I didn't want to talk, like, it's about this guy, right?
Right? No, no, of course not.
But this realm is, if he ever heard it, he would know it was him. And
Hmm.
that sort of part, like your girlfriend being like, well, I don't want to like spend this extra energy letting him know that he's got a song about him. Like, he's
Right.
a douchebag to even get that. Like, just let it be this thing. And maybe one day he'll realize, oh, I remember that show.
That's so funny.
you know?
And the fact that it's not about a relationship makes it even funnier to me because it comes across as a relationship, and yeah, that's even better. It's just some random dude. You're like, nope, dude, your sound sucked. So we wrote a song about it,
Yep,
right?
exactly.
Um, It reminds me of many years ago when Alanis Morissette was first starting out, and I remember a friend of mine turned to me and said, "I'm so fucking glad I'm not her ex-boyfriend."
Yeah.
Right? I
Yep.
mean, just like, can you imagine that? Like this album that's just like fucking brutal,
Yep.
towards whoever's fucked her over, and it goes like double platinum, right? And you would be that guy sitting there listening to it and thinking, this entire album's about me. I'm a fucking asshole, right? Or like Carly Simon, "You're So Vain," which is probably the king of all of those songs.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, just knowing that would be like, I mean, that's revenge enough.
And
Like you don't even.
and so that part is the part that fuels it. Anytime that I do anything now, I just imagine like someday when Oprah interviews me, who's gonna have to eat their own shit, you know? and
Love it,
and I don't have to explicitly put that out there. It can just be the energy of it, and those people know, you know? And
right,
like that's all the energy needs put in there, but that sort of feeling is universally human, right? Just
right.
of people and what the your reaction to them and so on and so forth. And that's I love that. I love that. And I think for Brian, that was the band people. Everyone everyone eventually does what I want to do, but they always are like, I don't. mm." So this record, it was like, let's put Brian on there because Brian was, like I said, all we would do, like we would leave band practice and we'd always just like that'd be like our nightcap, you know. It's like you guys want to play Brian? It's like and it was just for
Love it.
us. And then I was like, let's put it on this record.
I love it.
And they're like, "Ugh, I don't know about that, Jasmine." I said, I think it's perfect.
Oh,
It's a
it's so
perfect
funny.
part.
It's so funny. So you just mentioned your real name. So um, here's a question for you.
Okay.
When you're on stage, do you identify as Wonky Tonk or do you identify as Jasmine?
It's a great question, and it's definitely wonk.
Yeah.
Uh, j- so I've created. I need Jasmine. Jasmine is me, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then Wonky Tonk is my superhero. You know,
Okay.
then I can get up there and put on my boots, and then I'm a different person. But if it's like open mic or something, and they're like, Jasmine, come up here. It's like I can't even. I can't go there.
Hmm.
And now Wonky Tonk needed a hero, so I created Charlene Davis, who's a little bit of a
Wow.
hillbilly mess. So it's Charlene's behind Wonky and Jasmine's behind it all, right? So, but it's this fun. How do I play with that?
So
And
fun.
it's really fun, and it means more outfits.
Right. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I haven't seen you live, of course, but I would love to. And if things ever open up again, then I'll bring you out to Seattle because I think you'd have a lot. You've had a lot of fun out here, a lot.
I would love that.
Um, but it sort of reminds me of like Alice Cooper, right? Who just he actually became his character, right? And that was it. Like everyone knows him as Alice Cooper,
Right?
right?
Exactly.
Um, and for a long time in the mid '70s, when he really went through a bunch of shit, um, according to him, he kind of lost his own sense of identity. Like he became Alice.
Right.
He was no longer Vincent. He was Alice. And I mean, to the point where one story I read said somebody actually called him by his real name and he didn't even respond. Like it wasn't,
Yeah.
he's Alice. That's it.
Yeah.
And
It's
that's
it's an incredible. I mean, I feel like that sort of thing happens, and you have Joker Man, and who became what was his name, Heath Ledger. You know, becoming the Joker so much that he
hmm
lost himself in any of that method acting, which I think is interesting because, like when you asked earlier, do you want to be called Jasmine or Wonky? It's
hmm
like two different people. Like I was Jay Lorraine. I can tell what part of me someone saw by what they choose to call me, and it helps keeping things straight. But then also, I think for me and not Alice Cooperland, Wonky Tonk has just like helped me realize that Jasmine is Wonky Tonk. It's just like all of these, they after a certain point you don't need the magic cape because you've always been able to fly. And so
Right.
it's been this fun thing where it's not like this weird convergence of identity, but everything just proves itself, like
Hmm.
science and religion.
Right.
Science proves God, man.
Right.
We're our
Exactly.
enemies.
It's so funny. Um, yeah, I've had a few characters in my head that I like to be every once in a while. Not so much now, but in my early 20s, definitely. Yeah, there
Yeah,
was there was a Glenn that was one thing and Glenn that was another,
yeah,
and
good.
it's kind of fun, you know. Um, what I found though is that I would end up in situations where I would have completely separate groups of friends that I would hang out, depending on how I felt. Um, and it was always very uncomfortable when I'd have like those groups meet together, right?
Yeah,
Because I'm this thing over here, this character, and then I'm another character over here,
yeah.
right? And so that was always a little bit awkward.
Which
Um,
is interesting to me because I feel like that's probably why you made those sorts of bills, those music bills, right? Like satisfying all those elements where
yeah,
I if it gets uncomfortable again, I mean, I think that's a growth. And sometimes I found that my friends of all the different persuasions, when they meet each other, they're just like, whoa, this part of the world exists, right? It's not like, Glenn, who are you? I don't know you
right.
anymore. It's like, what are these people?
Yeah,
It's fun.
it's. Uh, I think part of that, and this is probably why you and I kind of feel the same sort of way about this is I spent a decent amount of my adolescence in a tiny little mountain town, and I fucking hate it. Like I threatened to kill myself, like just anything to get me out of here,
Yeah,
right? And I felt that way for years and years, and it's only in say like the last maybe decade that I'm like, okay, well there was some value in that, right? But I couldn't see it,
right?
and I did everything to get away. Like I mean, I lived all over the world. I refused to go back, whatnot. And then about 15 years ago, I guess, I went back for the first time and I was like, this is actually really beautiful. This is a nice place to be. The people aren't nearly as bad as I remember them to be. Um,
Done.
yeah, yeah. And I'm like, I remember I was married to my first wife at the time. Yeah, I'm bad at marriage. Um, and I remember saying, "Hey, we should, like buy a building here or something, 'cause it's super cheap." And she's like, "Fuck you. We're not doing that. Like that's just not gonna happen."
Man,
But I was like, I mean, at that point, you could buy a building for, like 30 grand. That was the size of like a city block. I was
wow.
like, "Yeah, think of all the fun we could have here." And she's like, "Yeah, you could do it solo, right? You could do it by yourself." I was like, "Well,
Was that the same one that didn't like that you bought 500
no,
tickets?
no, that was wife number two. Like I said, I'm bad at marriage. Um,
It's a hard thing. I don't think that's a real thing to succeed at.
no, it's not. It's not. It's really, really, really hard. Um, and I think my acceptance of that finally was good for me, all in all.
Yeah,
It's like I probably will get married again, but it's got to be a sure thing. I mean, as much as something like that could be a sure thing,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
Um,
Sorry to derail you. Your mountain town, your city block building.
it's,
Just go back home and all the Glens.
yeah, well, I mean, I still think about it. Um, and my current girlfriend, of course, is like, no, 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 no. Like she won't even leave, Seattle area. She's like, anything that's remotely or potentially, well, Republican, basically. She's like, no, I won't even, think about it.
Yeah,
Um, Whereas I don't really care. I mean, I do politically. I'm, extraordinarily, liberal. Um, but I don't care if people around me aren't. I mean, I really don't. I just kind of like, kind of shrug them off. It's not that big of a deal to me. Um, but a lot of people can't do that. They get, super angry
Hmm.
by that stuff. Um, and actually, here's a good question for you, Jasmine. So, you come from Kentucky. You're in Ohio now, right? Is that?
I'm in Kentucky now, but
Hmm.
I'm right over the river, so
Oh,
we
okay.
Cincinnati.
That's right. See, I always forget that. I always forget it's like, you know, it's like the first time I was in Nashville, and I was meeting some music industry guys, and one of them said, "Oh, I got to get home." But earlier in the night, he had said he was from Huntsville. And I was
Mhm.
like, first of all, Huntsville, like, fuck that. And he's like, "Well, I have to be there in an hour. I can wait another 15 minutes." And that's when it first dawned on me. I'm like, I'm 45 minutes from fucking Alabama.
Right.
Right. I mean, it's like, even though I knew my geography, it was like that's so weird.
It is. I think that's a big part of the Midwest where you've got all of these very big cities, or at least energetically big cities, all within an hour or 2 hours of each other. Whereas I
Hmm.
think I haven't made it to the West Coast for touring for that similar reason of that. If you're not in that region, then it's 4, 5, 6, 7 hour drives between energetic cities. And
Oh,
here
yeah.
you can go 15 minutes and be in a whole other
Yeah.
or the realm of people, places, things. And
Right.
yeah, Nashville, Alabama,
I yeah,
Cincinnati, Kentucky.
and I love Nashville. I mean, it's one of my favorite cities on the planet. Um, Despite it being right next to Alabama.
Right.
Um, but yeah,
Like
that
why it's
totally blew my
complete.
mind.
Yeah. Geography is
Um,
bonkers like that. When I'm on tour, especially up north in Wisconsin and Michigan and Iowa, it's going up the Mississippi. I went on a boat with this person that showed me all. It's like, oh, that's here and that's here, and it's like, oh my gosh, those are hour drives and whole different worlds in my
hmm
head because of the way you bounce around for tour. But then being on this river,
hmm
realizing that I've always been just across the river from everywhere I've ever gone.
Yeah,
It's a very
yeah.
bonkers realization.
Yeah, one of my best friends lives right on the Iowa, I'm sorry, right on the Iowa border in Illinois.
Mhm.
And he and I used to have this joke when we were like in our early 20s that, someday we're gonna buy a building in what was the city? Dubuque. Just because we like to say the name,
Yeah.
like, neither one of us had been in Dubuque, right? And then he ended up living, like fairly close to Dubuque. And I'd go and visit him every once in a while. And it was only this last time I went to visit where he's like, let's go to Iowa, And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, great. And of course he had been there multiple times because it's literally right across the Mississippi River.
Right.
And it was so weird. I mean, just going across that river and you could feel it was entirely like Illinois and Iowa couldn't possibly be more different,
Yeah.
you know? And we went to this little place to get some seafood, which probably not the best fucking idea, since you're in
Iowa's
Iowa, but
you need
um
corn.
yeah. And we're not talking crawfish, we're talking like, real seafood, like, okay, well, the closest ocean is, 1,000 miles away, but anyway, so we showed up there and he's got like dreadlocks down to his ass. He's a professor, but he still has like these long dreadlocks and whatnot. And I showed up and I've got all these fucking earrings and luckily my nails weren't painted then, but um, and I think my hair was a normal color, so I mean it was mostly okay. But we basically looked like Mutt and Jeff, in this place, and it was like at least for people in Davenport, Iowa, it was like a nice place, right? Because it was right, and it is nice, right on the river. But the way that people would look at us was just like, who the fuck are these people, and why are they here, and why haven't they left yet, right? um, and I think I ordered like my third vodka soda or something like that, and the waitress kind of looks at me like, God damn it, he's not going to stop, right? He's gonna stay here, you know. I'm like, no, 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 Oh, it was hysterical, you know, and I swear to God, they charged us like three times what they should have,
Yeah.
right?
That's
Just
it.
because we're not from there or whatever. Like I don't know.
Right.
And I'm sure my buddy will think the story is bullshit because his viewpoint was obviously different. He had been to Davenport, a bunch of times, and I was like, this is so fucking weird. I mean, it's so weird.
Yeah.
I yeah, I had a really hard time just adjusting to this part of the world actually exists, right?
Exactly. Like America, right?
Yeah,
So you feel
exactly.
like this part's the America part, which is interesting when you're driving on tour and you get out of the van and you feel the weight of the city you're in, and it's like, how the hell am I here? It's like
Right,
we gotta sing songs to these people.
right.
And generally though, um, because now there's a place, is it in Davenport? We call Dubuque Dubucky. It's
Debunking.
always
I love it.
it's always debauchery there. Like we ended up with somebody's coat and cell phone in a hotel and getting phone calls from it was a debucky, man. But Davenport is where Daytrotter was,
Hmm.
and this whole other new. It's like that was a little bit of a pitchfork, West Coast sort of momentum within
Right.
heartland of America. So there's gotten to be they're still not used to weirdos coming through, but
No.
it's you get just kind of like with your perspective of politics, they kind of are like, all right, we're used to this. They'll be gone tomorrow. We won't cross
Right.
the scene. Right?
I love that so much. When I first went to visit my buddy, who's he's in a town called Rock Island,
Yep.
which is which
It's extravagant.
yeah, I've come to like it a little bit, like, and I've gone out to visit him like three or four times. Um, but the first time I was out there, I was going through my first divorce, and so not feeling so great, and he was like, well, I have to work, but there's a bar, like a mile away.
Yeah.
It's like, fuck. First thing I do, of course, being a city boy, is like, do they have Uber out here? No, they don't. Okay, fuck. Do they have cabs? And I finally found a cab company, and it took him like half an hour to get to his house. And then, of course, the ride was like, 2.5 seconds to get to the bar. But that was all I could do, and there was no way I was going to walk. Anyway, so I go and I sit by myself at this bar, and I had my headphones on, and just kind of like feeling sorry for myself, like going through the divorce and whatnot.
Yeah.
And then really feeling sorry for myself because all I see is like Budweiser advertisements, everywhere, throughout the bar, including pictures. My favorite, a Budweiser banner that had a picture of a guy with a rifle and a buck slung over his shoulder, and it said Budweiser after a hard day. Right? It's like, fuck, man, where am I?
Right?
You
This
know?
this.
Yeah. So I had my headphones in, which is very antisocial, especially in that part of the world, where you talk to people.
Yeah.
Um, and so I finally took my headphones out, and the bartender, who was this lady, probably about 80 years old or something like that, super super sweetheart, was like, "What are you listening to?" And I could tell like she regretted asking that question,
Yeah.
right? And I said, without thinking, I was like, "Husker Du." She was like, "You mean like the game?" And I was like, oh fuck, why did I even say that? I should have just said, I don't know, Liberace or something like, you
Right.
know. So yeah, they were just laughing at me like, that's that guy that listens to funny music,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's funny music. Um, but I do okay. I do okay with the redneck guys, like
Yeah,
just having grown up in the middle of nowhere.
exactly. That's
Um,
what I was thinking. One
yeah,
of the things out there.
it takes a while for me to warm up to it. But once I do, I'm like, hey. And the one thing I can always say is, hey, I grew up in a mining town of 1,000 people, right? And they're suddenly they're like, oh, you're okay,
Yeah,
right? You're okay.
exactly.
Forget the earrings, or we like you're okay.
Yeah,
And after being called faggot so many thousands of times, it just kind of like rolls off. Like it, it's almost even not an insult. It just becomes like, okay,
right. I always go, thanks for noticing.
yeah, exactly. But I mean, if you think about it, it's not that much different than what I just said, calling them, fucking rednecks, right? I
Right.
mean, it's that's their way of dealing with the outside, and my way of dealing with the outside is calling them, and I'm not condoning it actually either way, but
Right.
it's just kind of the way it is.
Yeah,
Um,
but people are. But
yeah,
then you communicate, right? So then if you can communicate even to that point of being able to say, "Hey, I grew up in this mountain town, the mining town," then it's
right,
like, "Oh, boom, here we go." Like now I
right,
met this redneck and actually they're some of them are pretty cool. And I met this vegan and he's pretty cool, right? That's
right,
part of like
right,
whatever those
exactly,
words are. And so that starts to evolve and then doesn't even become a bad thing for them to say in their head, right? Like
right,
it's
yeah,
just another essence. The punks, the
yeah,
metalheads, right? Like
exactly,
not saying
exactly,
they're all the same and like should be held that way, but I think it becomes just our as humans we have to put things into a category in order to understand them, to hold them. Otherwise it's just like what is this, right?
right. No, I totally agree with that. And that's something I don't want to get too deep into this because people lose their fucking minds when you talk about this stuff. But um, I don't necessarily entirely begrudge people who feel the way that some of these what I just called rednecks feel,
Mhm.
because you have to understand where they come from,
Right,
right?
right,
And I can say that without saying what they say is okay, because
right.
I don't think that. I just say, yeah, I mean, again, you just have to understand where they're coming from,
Yeah,
and they're using the words that to them best fit their viewpoint of like who you are,
right.
right? They don't necessarily know, you know. Um, the little town I grew up in, there were two black people in the entire county, right? And there's a county of like 20,000 people. Um, and when I moved to Seattle, still pretty white. I mean, Seattle's extraordinarily white. Um,
But it's a big
but
city.
right, right. I mean, huge to me. It was,
Yeah,
literally 500 times the size of the town I grew up in, right? Um, but by the time I went back there, maybe a decade after I'd moved away, um, there actually were, I know this is going to sound amazing. There were two black people who actually lived in my city, right? Like that was progress.
yeah,
They literally like doubled the size of the black population, in 10 years.
wow.
Um, and it's nothing like that now. To be honest, most of the people who actually lived there when I was a kid are long gone. They left, and people like me with this crazy idea of buying a building and turning it into a bar, now basically run the town.
Yeah. Generations,
So,
man.
I'm
Time.
sorry?
Generations and
Oh,
time.
yeah. Yeah,
Interesting to be able to get old enough to see that change and be the people changing it, right?
exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly. Jasmine, I've got a couple of quick questions for you.
Okay.
Um, we talked about John Prine a little bit earlier. I am not super familiar with him, to be perfectly honest. Like I've heard lots of his songs. I don't think I've ever owned a John Prine album. I don't
Yeah.
think. I always like what I hear from him. Um, but in one of your interviews, you said something along the lines of not wanting to talk about like what kind of band you are or your genre, I guess, And I think that the interviewer, if I remember correctly, said something along the lines of, it's got a country feel to it, right? Which it does. There's no doubt. Um, but it's not country. I don't know, I'm not going to try to make you explain your genre because nobody wants to talk about that, you know. Um, but when I listen to like John Prine, my notes say in quotes, "happy country," like that. That's basically what I put down, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
and that got me down a rabbit hole, which is listening to Steve Earle, who happens to be one of my favorite artists. I mean,
Yeah.
period.
So good.
Yeah, and when when I people ask me every once in a while, like, what are your top 10 albums? And Copperhead Road is always like, in the top 10. And people are like, what? You know, that doesn't fit, because it's for me, it's like right next to like, Skinny Puppy and Skid Sisters of Mercy and shit like that, right?
Yeah.
Jesus and Mary Chain, so on and so forth. Um, I don't really have a question on that. What I was really looking at is, um, what do you think about artists like Steve Earle? Like, they're, I guess, do you have like an affinity for artists like that because they're country, but they're not country?
Yeah. It's a great question. I feel so I'm certain that my soul is a 70-year-old man.
I
And
love that.
so people like Steve Earle just make sense to me, you
Right.
know? And and I I love that we're able to speak, and I got to be on a different podcast the other day, and the same feeling of, because it's
Hmm.
country people don't get what the hell is going on here. That's not
Right.
the country is, I don't even know what country is. But then you have like, I grew up in basement shows, punk rock, ska, mosh pits, metal. This is
Hmm.
country only just started happening when a newspaper said I played folk music, and I was like, what the fuck is folk music, and and I think that there's this whole realm. I think punk rock is a mentality, just like metal is a mentality,
Hmm.
be before it's a genre. And and so someone like Steve Earle is swirled up with all of these Texas folks like Towns Van Zandt and Guy Clark, and
Right.
people are a part of John Prine, and this whole network of just like, not even good old boys, but like the Towns Van Zandt leaving his extremely wealthy oil family to
Hmm.
go be a rambler and a gambler, like,
Right.
they were the punk rock people of their country towns. And then they met each other along the road, and they're like, hey, man, your songs are great. Can I play that when I go to Johnson City? It's like, yeah, man,
Right.
okay, right. And so that's John Prine, Steve Earle, Guy Clark, all the Texas boys, all of the people that just exchange the same way you find somebody and like, that's awesome. Can I share that on this podcast, or just
Hmm.
share? So I think someone like Steve Earle definitely is like the emo punk rocker of
Right.
country music, right? Because he's just
Yeah.
gonna, well, fuck you guys, I'm just gonna get drunk again and like sing about this and make you uncomfortable. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, do it, dude. Um, and I love all of them, but I again, it's beyond genre, it's more mentality. And so Steve
Right.
Earle is being like pretty basically badass, and despite all of his anger and sadness,
Hmm.
always using music to come out of it, right? And that's like, cool, man. I don't know, I don't think, to me, that's country. I think that's like living. And yeah, but Steve Earle's great, and I love that you love Copperhead Road. It's such a, I mean, that one
It's
just
such an
brings it,
incredible
right?
album.
It's so heavy.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. And then I was listening to Jerusalem, which
Yep.
I hadn't listened to in a couple of years. Listened to it yesterday. Um, and the John Walker Blues, which I know pissed off so many of his fans,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Because basically he's saying like, kind of, I get where this guy came from,
Yeah.
right? Like I don't endorse it, but I mean I get where he kind of lost his mind and did what
Right.
he did. And yeah, it had been years since I'd listened to that, And
How did it feel?
well, it's awesome. I mean, it's a great album.
Yeah.
Um, and by far his most political album, right?
Mhm.
Like, I mean, he went further than he'd ever done, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but just an incredible fucking album, you know. And he's an incredible guy,
Yeah.
you know, all the way around.
Exactly. And he's unabashedly him, right? Which allowed that album to be so political, where it's like, dude, I'm not trying to get an uproar about anything. I'm just gonna tell you about how I fucking feel and see the
Right.
world. And like, and then tomorrow maybe it's something different, but here it is. Here I
Yep.
am. Like, fuck
Yep.
yeah, dude. I can respect that even if I don't agree with what you're saying.
Yeah. Didn't he? I forget. I think it was him who ran Blow in the 70s. Wasn't that Steve Earle? I
That
think it
sounds
was.
like it could have been him. I think
Yeah.
they all were very, I
Well,
mean, speedy dude.
I know he wrote several songs that at least hinted at it, but I can't remember straight up if he's the guy who did that or not. I know he was in prison, but I'm
Mhm.
not quite sure why.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a details kind of gal. Like the stories in the past, it's just like, oh, whoa, this happened. But
Right.
I wouldn't put it. I mean, he seems. I wouldn't not believe that.
Right. Yeah, he's an interesting guy.
Yeah.
Um, Jasmine, let's start wrapping up this a little bit. But
Okay,
here's a
Glenn.
question that I like to ask.
Okay.
What is something that nobody, I'm sorry, what is something about you that nobody would guess looking at you or hearing you?
Ooh, that's a good question, Glenn.
It's a
I
hard
love
one.
that question. I love the secret parts.
You know what's funny?
What?
I asked this question, but I have no idea how I would answer it myself.
Ooh, should I ask you first?
Nope, nope. That's not the way it works. Maybe
Okay.
round two, right? Because we're definitely going to do a round two because you're a lot of fun to talk to.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, it's all on you this time.
Huh. Well, I would say probably everything that I never talk about, which is a lot. But I think that, mm, oh gosh, there's so much. Which
Hmm.
one do I want to pick to tell you? Mm,
Do it stream of conscious, just like whatever comes to mind.
well, okay. So there's this big part of my life that's coming back up. I call it, this is, you'll get it. We talked about all these things. So I call it Trailer Park Indians, but my grandma got really, really hell bent on our Cherokee heritage.
Hmm.
And when I was little, we lived like 14 people to one two-bedroom trailer.
Hmm.
And she got really into our Cherokee heritage. And for some reason, we had this clubhouse by the pool, and I call it the Trailer Park Indian Club, and it was just like peace pipes and all kinds of Trailer Park Indians, and we would go to the woods and have these like my grandma made us shawls and moccasins, and we had naming ceremonies, and it's like her name's Brown Eyes and mine was Blue Swan, and this whole element of like, because we were so many people to a small trailer, she started making us teepees. So we had teepees in this trailer park we were sleeping
Wow.
in. And it's like, and the thing is that it's like extremely from the outside would be offensive. But from
Hmm.
the inside it was so pure heartedly like um fighting, hard working, gritty ass country white woman getting in touch with her Cherokee heritage in a
Right.
trailer park, this part of like which which I think has begun. This is part of Wonky, right? It's just like
Hmm.
coming at it from all kinds of different angles that people would never know
Right.
existed. So I would get out of school and we would tour with the Trailer Park Indians, going to other schools, telling them what it was like to be an Indian, Native American, but they were calling
Wow.
them Indians.
Right.
All right. And not only, I don't realize that any of this is any different than someone's childhood until like 5 years ago, where it's like, oh, this is a thing that most people don't experience, you know?
Right.
it's just one of those layers underneath all the other layers that doesn't really get to
Hmm.
come up because there's a lot that it opens up, right? And so
Yeah.
I would say I want to share that part right now.
I like that. I like that. Have you ever looked into the Cherokee language?
I have when I was in Ecuador. Hold on, let me get this. When I was in Ecuador, we did all of these like medicine songs. So I got this big shamanic drum,
Oh, that's awesome.
right? And my grandma's dying of 1,000 cancers, so I got that drum to go and like learn some Cherokee medicine songs and just like sing her soul to heaven.
Oh, that's so cool.
So I've been learning a little bit of the Cherokee language, but obviously, like the same way that I was a Cherokee trailer park Indian, right?
Right,
Trying to
right.
grasp it, but really it being so far. Wait, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous.
It's
It's very.
beautiful. And
Mhm.
the writing system that they came up with, and I think it was fairly recent. I think it was late 19th century, early 20th century, when they came up with the writing system. It's absolutely gorgeous. Just really pretty.
Yeah, I love that you know that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Well, I one of
take.
my favorite books in the world is called Apache Language and Culture, and I
Oh,
forget who wrote it, but they also have a really fascinating, language history and writing system and whatnot.
beautiful.
I never learned it
Yeah,
because I
we learned about it.
learned about it, right, right, and I think it's because to learn a language like that, it's very dependent on being a part of
Right, it's
that
cultural.
social group,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
It's
but
like
that's
when
language anyway, though, right? That's what we're talking about, like rednecks or any of these words that come from whatever cultural construct. But if we're so far away from nature or from that ancestry,
right.
it's very foreign. And yeah, sorry to talk
Yeah.
over you.
No, no, not at all. I love it. It reminds me of particularly when I was living back east, with Italian Americans who would be like, even though they, 7 or 8 generations removed from Italy, would have this like, we're Italian, but when they spoke Italian, they sounded like a mentally deficient 3-year-old,
Right.
you know, but yet
I
they were so proud of
agree.
that, like of their Italian heritage.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, and Italian is definitely one of those languages where you have to be in the tribe, so to speak, to really, speak it. It's a very idiomatic language, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Um, so that's all really fascinating. Jasmine, I'm going to cut this,
Okay.
but I want to keep talking for like another 2 or 3 hours.
I know. It's fun.
So I'm definitely going to have you back on. And we didn't talk a huge amount about your music. So obviously the next time that's what we have to talk about.
This is fun. We can talk about language,
Yeah,
whatever.
well, I mean that's why I do what I do, right? It's all about, kind of like free form sort of conversation, and you know, I ran out of my 5 things I was going to talk to you about within the first like 10 minutes. So then it was more of just like, hey, let's talk,
That wasn't a
see where it
problem though.
goes.
Yes.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Hey, I'm gonna cut this recording,
Okay.
but stay on for a couple of minutes if you don't mind,
Okay.
and we'll go from there. Anyway, Jasmine, hey, it's awesome to talk to you. All right, I'm gonna have
Same.
you back on very soon. All right,
Awesome.
bye now.